My name is Jake, and I'm a 24-year-old living in a rough neighborhood in Detroit. Life here can be tough, but it taught me the importance of looking out for others, especially those who are struggling. It goes without saying that we have our fair share of homeless people around the neighborhood. One of them is the Mute Man. He's a pretty fat individual who's very familiar around here, and you can pretty much guess where he got his name. He's a chill and likable dude who uses hand gestures to communicate, and you can say that he's the main character of this story, but not in the way you think. The story I'm about to share today is one of the most gruesome and mind-bending occurrences that I've had the misfortune of experiencing. It all happened 8 years ago, when I was only 16. The Mute Man was a common sight in the neighborhood back then. He was always hunched over, swaying from side to side as he shuffled along the sidewalk. His clothes were worn and dirty, but his eyes held a quiet dignity that made it clear he was doing his best to survive. He held a tattered cup in his hand, shaking it gently as people passed, hoping for some spare change. As I approached him one day, I couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness. It was difficult to see someone struggle like this, especially someone who was clearly dealing with so many challenges. I reached into my pocket, pulling out a couple of crumpled dollar bills and dropping them into his cup. His eyes lit up, and he offered a silent nod of gratitude, touching his heart with one hand. I continued on my way, not giving the encounter much thought. It was just another day in our neighborhood, and I had grown used to seeing people like him struggling to survive. Later that day, after school, I hung out with my friends at the local park. We talked about the usual stuff, sports, music, and our plans for the future. As the sun began to set, we decided to call it a day and head home. As I walked back to my house, I couldn't help but think of the Mute Man and the countless others in our neighborhood who were just trying to make it through another day. This guy, like many others, seemed to be a decent human being, so it was odd to me how such people could end up homeless. No doubt a combination of poor choices and bad luck, but the mystery was about to go a lot deeper because nothing could have prepared me for the events unfolding the next day. The next morning, I woke up and got ready for school. So far, so good. As I made my way to the corner store for my usual morning snacks, I saw the Mute Man standing near his usual spot, but something was off about him. He wasn't hunched over like he usually was, and he seemed to be standing taller, more confidently. He wasn't swaying anymore. Instead, he was eerily still, so still that he sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't help but feel that something was very wrong. He looked normal, let's say, but something was not quite right with his entire demeanor. I hesitated for a moment before walking over to him. As I got closer, I noticed that his eyes seemed different, too. They were no longer filled with that quiet dignity I had come to associate with him. Instead, they were cold and piercing, almost intrusive. I don't quite know how to explain the feeling, but you probably know what I'm talking about. I reached into my pocket, pulling out a dollar bill and holding it out to him. As I did, he looked me directly in the eye and said, "Thank you." His voice was clear and strong, which took me completely by surprise. I was stunned, unable to process what I had just heard. I kept my cool and walked away, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. You could say I should have confronted him about it, right? After all, he was obviously faking a disability to garner extra sympathy and dollars. There's a problem, though. On the one hand, that guy has been roaming around the neighborhood for years, and I had never heard him utter a word. That's a pretty astounding commitment, if you ask me. Unlikely that he could fake that. Then you had the fact that he spoke to me with such confidence and in such a clear voice that he couldn't have just slipped. It was like he meant to speak, fully aware of what he was doing. And he didn't seem embarrassed afterwards, which is what you would expect from someone getting exposed. You know, these two facts made the entire situation awkward and ominous, like something was not right. but I couldn't put my finger on it. I talked to my friends about it, but they didn't seem to share my concerns. They laughed it off, suggesting that maybe he had just been faking his muteness all along, but that couldn't have been the case. Or, at least, it seemed very unlikely. That night, as I lay in bed, the feeling of unease continued to grow. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination, that I was letting the events of the day get to me, but deep down, I knew that something was very, very wrong. As I drifted off to sleep, I started wondering what the next day would bring. I had no idea that my world was about to be turned upside down, and that the mute man's transformation was just the beginning to a more sinister conclusion. I woke up feeling a little more at ease, but the thought of the mute man's sudden transformation still lingered in the back of my mind. As I walked to school, I decided to take the usual route, hoping to catch a glimpse of the guy and see if anything had changed since yesterday. I kept my distance, not wanting to provoke him or make him uncomfortable, but I couldn't help but notice that he seemed different. He moved with more confidence, his posture straighter, and his gestures more deliberate. I made a mental note to mention it to my friends when I got to school. I figured that they might have noticed something too, or at least could help me make sense of what was going on. During lunch, I brought it up to my friends, describing the mute man's sudden change in behavior and demeanor. To my surprise, they hadn't noticed anything different about him. Some of them even shrugged it off, saying that maybe he had just finally found some help or had a good day. Maybe I was just overanalyzing, I told myself. But then again, maybe not. As I walked home from school, I took the same route as before, hoping to see the mute man again. And sure enough, there he was, standing near the same spot as the day before. He seemed to be waiting for something, or someone, and I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine as I watched him from afar. I spent around 30 minutes watching the guy, and the feeling that he was different grew considerably. I don't exactly know how to explain it, but he seemed to be over-inquisitive in a way. It's like he scanned the passers-by, analyzing their clothing and faces. He also seemed to do it carefully, analytically, while also taking care not to get caught in the act. It was all such a bizarre behavior, unlike the mute man I knew, the one who would almost always glue his gaze to the ground. I don't think I've ever seen him look me in the eyes before. I tried to convince myself that there had to be a logical explanation for this sudden change. Maybe he had received some help or found a new medication that allowed him to speak. Or maybe I just didn't know the guy as well as I thought. Little did I know, everything was about to change the next day. After school, I headed home, determined to find some answers. As I walked along the same route, I spotted the mute man standing in the same spot as before. He seemed to be waiting, almost as if he knew that I would be walking by. I hesitated, unsure of what to do, but eventually decided to keep my distance and observe him from afar. That evening, as I sat in the living room flipping through the channels, I stumbled upon a breaking news report. My heart skipped a beat as I saw a familiar face on the screen. It was the mute man. The news anchor reported that a body had been found in a nearby abandoned building, and it was identified as the one we called the mute man. The cause of death was a brutal stabbing, and the police were now actively searching for the killer. They didn't go into too many details about the murder itself, but I did catch something peculiar, to say the least. The anchor stated that the body had been found 2 days ago, which shocked me to the core. I had just seen the guy some 2 hours earlier. This whole situation sent literal chills down my spine. I simply couldn't believe what I was hearing. If the mute man had been dead for at least 2 days, who had I been seeing on the streets all this time? It's then when it hit me. The time of death coincided with the change in the mute man's behavior. Needless to say, there was one thing left for me to do: go to the mute man's normal spot and call the police. That's exactly what I did, and nothing could have prepared me for what I would discover. Law enforcement was already there. I'm talking about 5 police cars, 1 SWAT van, and an ambulance. The street had been blocked, and there were officers swarming everywhere. preventing people from walking through the scene. I say scene because the mute man's normal dwelling spot, the one I had just visited several hours earlier, had turned into a crime scene. It was 8 p.m., so the natural light wasn't on my side, but the lights on the street were enough to reveal the horror. I didn't realize what I was looking at initially, but it soon got to me. There was something hanging from a garbage bin which I initially thought was a mask. But no. As I got closer, I got a better look at the gruesome picture, and my hair stood up at the realization. That wasn't a mask, it was actually the mute man's entire face hanging on the side of the garbage bin. Suddenly, it hit me. Someone had killed and worn his skin, his face, for the past several days. Someone on a mission, most likely looking for another victim. I instinctively took a few steps backwards, realizing I could have been that victim quite easily. If that wasn't creepy enough, that was the last I heard about the case. No suspect had been apprehended and there was no follow-up to the case. Everything simply went dark, as if nothing had happened, which is probably the scariest thing of all. I can't help but think, even today, after so many years, that there may still be a sadistic killer out there who knows how I look and the area I live in. And I'll tell you right now, that isn't a nice thought to live with. Hi, I'm Jake, but my name or who I am doesn't really matter. The following is not my story, so I cannot take credit for it. Everything you're about to hear has been voice recorded by a guy called Alex Schultz, a German student who apparently moved to the US several years ago. But the background isn't important. What's on the tape, though, is. As a side note, I've also found a journal with additional information on the matter, as well as sketches and interview-style recordings. This makes it obvious that this Alex guy was deeply involved in this research activity that eventually led to his disappearance. The following is the authentic recording which I had to restore to eliminate sound glitches and sound output. I've always had a morbid fascination with urban legends and ghost stories. I guess it's because they provide a sense of thrill and excitement that my otherwise mundane life lacked. So when I first heard about the chilling legend of the Watcher, I couldn't help but be drawn to it. It started as a random conversation during a college party. My friends and I were huddled around a campfire, sharing creepy stories and trying to one-up each other. That's when Emma, a girl from my English class, mentioned the Watcher. I heard about this ghostly figure that's supposed to appear to people on their last day of life, she said, her voice a mixture of excitement and fear. They call it the Watcher. It's supposed to guide the souls of the dead into purgatory, where they wait for judgment. The idea of a mysterious spirit appearing to people right before they died wasn't anything new. Ancient Greeks had some similar beliefs, and I was sure other cultures did too throughout the history. But then I started looking into it, out of sheer curiosity, and the rabbit hole went deeper than I could have ever expected. To my surprise, there were quite a few accounts of people who had seen the figure. Most of them described it as a tall, shadowy figure, dressed in a long, flowing robe. Some even claimed that the Watcher had a gentle, almost comforting presence, despite its eerie appearance. As I dug deeper into the legend, I discovered that many people in town had their own stories and encounters with the Watcher. It seemed that almost everyone I talked to had either seen the figure themselves or knew someone who had. It was some type of widespread underground legend that seemed more than that. This one felt like it had some meat to it. Needless to say, I decided to investigate further. One day, as I was discussing the Watcher with my roommate, Jack, he mentioned that his great-aunt claimed to have seen the spirit years ago. According to Jack, she had been in poor health and was bedridden. The night before she passed away, She told her family that she had seen the Watcher standing by her bedside. The way she described it, it wasn't scary or menacing, he told me. He also added that she said it was actually kind of comforting, like it was there to help her. But it still freaked everyone out, and they didn't know what to make of it. This encounter only fueled my curiosity. As one would expect, I started to spend my evenings talking to people around town, collecting their stories and experiences. Many of the accounts were eerily similar, with the Watcher appearing as a tall, shadowy figure, often accompanied by a strange, otherworldly calm. You could have easily dismissed these stories as pure superstition. I'll admit that. But you know me, I'm not that guy. If there's even an ounce of possibility, I'll go for it. As time went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this legend than I had initially thought. Determined to find answers, I began searching for any information I could find about the Watcher. My quest led me to the town's library, where I pored over countless books and newspaper articles, desperate for any clue that might help me understand what was happening to me. It was in a dusty, forgotten corner of the library that I found the book. It was an old leather-bound tome with yellowed pages and a musty smell. The title was faded, but I could just make out the words, "The Watcher, a Guide to the Afterlife." My heart raced as I carefully opened the book and began to read. The book told the story of the Watcher, a mysterious figure who had been seen throughout the ages. It spoke of his purpose, which was to guide the souls of the deceased into the purgatory, where they awaited their final judgment. It also described how those who could see the Watcher were marked for death, with only one day left to live. Some cultures claimed that the Watcher was only doing his job of guiding the spirits to their afterlife home, similar to what Charon would do in ancient Greek legends. Others, though, thought that the Watcher was a demonic figure who would wander the world, looking for the vulnerable to steal their souls. You can imagine the thrill and dread that someone like me would draw from such a story. As I read, I felt a mixture of fear and fascination. Was it possible that this legend was true? And if it was, how could I prove it? I spent months looking into the matter, doing dozens of interviews and sketches based on first and second-hand accounts. No idea how reliable they are, but I suspect some to be quite trustworthy. More importantly, I've also been able to link the Watcher to various sites, some of which showed more promise than others. My research eventually led me to the outskirts of town, where I discovered an abandoned mansion with an eerie look to it. I already knew of the mansion. The building had been abandoned for years, and it was now little more than a crumbling, overgrown mess. However, as I approached it, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something significant about this place. Maybe it was the eerie silence that surrounded the site, or the way the shadows seemed to dance along the crumbling walls, but something about the place felt alive. I experienced a strange mixture of fear and curiosity as I stepped through the broken doorway and into the gloomy interior. The air inside was cold and damp, and a thick layer of dust covered the stone floor. As I explored the abandoned rooms and hallways, I couldn't help but feel as though I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. Despite my growing unease, I pressed on, determined to find any evidence that might connect the area to the Watcher. I visited the mansion several times over the following week, always careful not to get caught in the process. Fortunately, the area was rather deserted, as the mansion was at the edge of the town. It was the 7th day that I experienced the first weird event. It sounded like a whispering voice several feet behind me, out of the blue. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. But there was no one there. I couldn't understand what the voice said, but the intonation felt warm and soft, comforting almost. Despite the unnerving experience, I couldn't bring myself to leave the place. I felt as though I was on the brink of uncovering the truth about the Watcher, and I couldn't walk away now. That night, I decided to camp out in one of the bottom floor rooms, hoping that I might find some answers in the darkness. As the hours ticked by, I found myself growing increasingly anxious, my senses heightened by the eerie silence that enveloped the mansion. Just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard the sound of footsteps echoing through the empty hallways. They were slow and deliberate, drawing closer with each passing moment. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my ears, as the footsteps stopped outside my room door. Slowly, ever so slowly, the door creaked open, and I found myself staring into the darkness beyond. And that's when I saw him, the Watcher. As I stared into the darkness, the figure of the Watcher seemed to materialize before my eyes. He was tall and thin, with long, flowing robes that seemed to blend into the shadows around him. His face was obscured by a hood, but I could see two burning white eyes staring straight at me. My heart raced, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I wanted to run, to scream, but I was paralyzed by fear. Instead, I watched as the dark figure slowly raised its hand and beckoned me to follow him. Amazingly, I was suddenly no longer afraid, but rather calm and serene. As I crossed the threshold, the door closed behind me, and I found myself in an endless expanse of darkness. The Watcher's presence a comforting beacon in the void. I do not know where I am. If you find this... This is the end of the recording. If you ask how I came in the possession of these materials, the answer is that I did my fair share of research after the unexplained disappearance of Alex Schultz. The case raised a lot of attention at the time, and I used the information available publicly, along with some of my own findings, to locate the mansion that Alex had mentioned. I found his tape recorder, along with other various materials, in the hallway, in front of the room he mentioned. I couldn't muster the courage to open the door and see what's inside.